Hello, I am Nicole Menendez, and I'm honored to speak to you about the Channel Islands National Park. Channel Islands National Park is a very unique park. It is located off the coast of California, established in 1980, and is a haven of natural beauty, rich history, and ecological diversity. The history of the Channel Islands is extremely fascinating as it is complex. So for thousands of years, the islands were home to the Chumash peoples who thrived on the abundant marine resources and unique landscapes. Their rich culture and deep connection to the land and sea are still evident today through archaeological sites and artifacts that are still scattered across the island. In 1500 BP, the tomol, which is a frameless planked canoe, was introduced, and this is actually the vessel that the Chumash people used to travel between the mainland and the Channel Islands. By the 19th century, European explorers and settlers began to take interest in the islands. They brought with them a different vision, one that led to a lot of exploitation of natural resources. In 1542, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed up the coast of California and ended up dying on the Channel Islands. He actually provided the first written description of the Channel Islands and their inhabitants. Sheep, ranching, oil drilling, and other introduction of non-native species began to threaten the fragile ecosystems of the islands. And not only were the fragile ecosystems of the islands compromised, but by 1806, the measles pandemic really took a huge effect on the Chumash population, and unfortunately, a significant amount of the Chumash people died from various diseases that they were vulnerable to. By the 1820s, the last of the island Chumash population was moved from the islands into the mainland, and many of them began to occupy the various missions that were popping up around California during this era. By 1850, California became a part of the United States in the Compromise of 1850, and at this time is when non-native species of the islands were being introduced, so things such as cattle, pigs, sheep, and horses. So at this time, there were also a lot of European settlers that were really starting to exploit the resources of the island and compromising these very fragile nesting areas for things such as seagulls, elephant seals, and the island foxes that inhabited the island. It wasn't until the mid-1920s that the public awareness and concern for conservation began to rise regarding the island. So in 1870, the U.S. Census of Agriculture listed there were over 50,000 sheep on Santa Cruz Island. And by 1874, there were 100,000 sheep reported on Santa Rosa Island. And many of the fragile chaparral habitats had been grazed down to the sand. So as we know, erosion became a very real problem during this time. By the mid-20th century, the public awareness and concern for conservation began to rise, and activists and conservationists rallied to protect these unique ecosystems, leading to the establishment of Channel Islands National Park. The national park ended up spanning over 250,000 acres and comprises of 5 of the 8 Channel Islands. So Anacapa Island, Santa Cruz Island, Santa Rosa Island, San Miguel, and Santa Barbara. Each island is distinct and offers a variety of landscapes from rugged cliffs to sandy beaches to lush forests and grasslands. In fact, this national park is considered the Galapagos of North America due to its incredible biodiversity and features numerous endemic species that are found nowhere else on Earth. There's about 60 species on the island that you can find nowhere else besides the Channel Islands. So things such as the island fox, which is probably the most famous. In 1911, sea otters are protected by law. So this is pretty significant because when the Europeans arrived to the Channel Islands, sea otters were actually present at that time. Unfortunately, they were completely hunted out, and there are currently no sea otters located on the Channel Islands. And this is very significant because sea otters are considered a keystone species for the California coastline and actually all the way up the west coast. So sea otters feed on things such as purple sea urchins that are very destructive to our kelp forests here in California. And kelp forests in California are very, very critical. They help protect from storms, and they house a lot of very important sea animals. By 1930, the elephant seals returned to San Miguel Island. In 1938, the Channel Islands National Monument is established, encompassing Anacapa Island, Santa Barbara Island, and is administered from Sequoia National Park. In 1947, President Truman signed a proclamation extending the boundaries of Channel Islands National Monument to include 1 nautical mile off the shores of Anacapa and Santa Barbara Island. So what this does is this provided a lot of protection for the marine life around the islands, which became evident that they were equally as important as the terrestrial animals on the island. Channel Islands National Park is not just a sanctuary for wildlife. It actually ended up being a living laboratory. So to this day, scientists study the island's ecosystems to understand things like climate change, invasive species, and delicate balance of nature. The park became a critical site for research and provided invaluable insights that help protect and preserve our planet's fragile ecosystems. So we really started to see a lot of science coming out of the islands, especially in the 1960s and 70s, when there was a lot of monitoring programs that were introduced to the island. Only 1 California brown pelican chick survived on Anacapa Island in 1970 due to pesticide contamination. So we were able to gather a lot of data from this national park in its early days. And as you can see right here, in 1985, these sea urchins comprised of 50% of the marine species harvested in Santa Barbara Channel. So because we didn't have those keystone species such as the sea otter present in the islands anymore, we had an overabundance of things like sea urchins that were harming our kelp forests. Okay, so in 1999, the last of the sheep are live captured and removed from the island. So at this time, there were very, very few endemic species left on the island. In fact, there were only 15 wild foxes left, and they were all brought into captivity to do a kind of a last-ditch effort in order to protect their species and hopefully breed them and reintroduce them into the islands. In 2002, bald eagles were released into the park as a step to reestablish the historical island population. In 2003, rats were eradicated from Anacapa Island, and by 2004, the first foxes that were captive bred were released back into the wild. So there was about a 5-year span where there were actually no island foxes located on the Channel Islands. So in 2006, 2 bald eagle pairs nested, and their first chick hatched in over 50 years on the islands. In 2007, the first peregrine falcon hatched in over 50 years. And in 2008, captive breeding program for the island fox succeeded in bringing the fox back from the brink of extinction on Santa Cruz Island, San Miguel Island, and Santa Rosa Island. In 2011, bald eagle hatches for the first time in over 60 years on Anacapa Island. Okay, so the current status of the park, like I mentioned, there's a lot of science and actually a lot of citizen science that comes out of this national park. So in 2012, the largest coastal wetland on Channel Islands has been restored. So a lot of this work has been done by volunteers. As of right now, I believe there's actually 2,000 volunteers that donate 74,000 hours is what they recorded in 2013, but it's the equivalent of 35 full-time positions. So the economic report of the visitors to the park states that over $24 million has been brought into restoring the park and helping with conservation projects throughout the island. So now for the future. There are many projects that are taking place on the island, and one that I want to highlight the most, or one that I have most knowledge about, is some archaeology that's taking place on the park. So as we know, the Chumash people inhabited these islands for over 13,000 years, and Patrick Gonzalez, or Dr. Patrick Gonzalez, is working on a project to help mitigate the climate change effects on some of these cultural sites. So we want to preserve these archaeological sites as much as possible, but we're kind of in a position where the islands are changing because of climate change throughout the entire planet, but we're really focusing on a lot of the sloped areas because it looks like a lot of the erosion is still taking place within these islands. In closing, I just want to urge everyone to explore the Channel Islands National Park and its wonders firsthand. We should be advocating for its preservation and share its story, ensuring that this incredible national treasure continues to inspire and educate for generations to come. Thank you.